This is going to be another video in my continuing series where I compare the Beatles stereo versus mono album and try to render a verdict on which I feel is the superior sounding album. And today I am going to cover the American album, Something New. Now this was made up of various tracks which appeared on the UK A Hard Day's Night album. Some of them were on the United Artists soundtrack, such as And I Love Her, Tell Me Why, and I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. And then there were some tracks that appeared on the B-side of the UK album. And to round it all out, there are three tracks from the Long Tall Sally, actually two tracks, I'm sorry, from the Long Tall Sally EP that was released in early 1964 in the UK. And then finally there is the German version of I Want to Hold Your Hand, just to kind of round things out. Now, I am going to first off show what I have in my collection for this album, and then I'll get into a track-by-track analysis. So this is my mono early pressing of Something New. I've got the original inner sleeve here. And this inner sleeve is also the same inner sleeve that was used for the Beatles' second album. And this is the label. And my stereo copy is actually an Apple pressing. And the vinyl is not as thick as the mono version that I have. And this is still in the shrink. It was from JCPenney's, and it's hard to tell what it retailed for. The price sticker is a bit faded, so I'm not sure what this went for. This would have been released in the late 60s, early 70s, before Capitol went to the lime green Capitol label. So that's where this pressing dates from. And then the last stereo pressing that I have is, I believe, a purple Capitol pressing. You know what I think about the purple Capitol pressings. The sound quality is crap, but nonetheless, it's part of the collection. And this is my cassette of Something New. And the track order on here is not exactly faithful to the original album. I'll Cry Instead is the first track on side one. Then When I Get Home, Matchbox, Tell Me Why, And I Love Her, I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. And then on side two, Things We Said Today, Anytime at All, Slow Down, If I Fell, then Come Give Me Dinah Hand. That's what that back looks like. And then there are two versions that are available on CD. This is the CD version that was released as part of the Capitol Albums Volume 1. It of course has the mono cover, and the CD itself is the Capitol Rainbow label. The back cover looks very similar to the original album, except the songs are printed, the song track listing are printed for the stereo and mono. And then the second version that is available is the CD, and this is the stereo cover, but this is the CD that was part of the US albums. And this reprints exactly what the back of the album jacket looked like. And the CD itself is also a replica of the Rainbow label, and they also include the original, it's a miniature reproduction of the original inner sleeve as well. So, track by track, I'll Cry Instead starts off the album, and in stereo it's a very good mix. The bass is very loud. And interestingly, in stereo, they use the UK mix. They don't use the mix that you'll find on the United Artists American soundtrack, where the first verse is repeated a second time at the end of the song. Stereo uses the UK mix, but in mono, it's actually the version that you find on the United Artists soundtrack of A Hard Day's Night. However, I find that the mix is flat and one-dimensional compared to the stereo version that you can find on the United Artists soundtrack. But just for the sake of comparing the differences, the stereo and the mono versions on Something New are different mixes. Now, for things we said today, in mono, the vocals are very clear. The backing track, however, is mixed very low, and it sounds very flat compared to stereo. So the stereo mix of things we said today is much beefier, and just the sound is a bit fuller. So I definitely prefer the stereo version of things we said today. Anytime at all, in stereo, the sound is much fuller. In mono, the sound is fine, but it's just a lot punchier in stereo. It's brighter. It's just a much more exciting track to listen to. The piano is much clearer in stereo, and the piano is almost mixed as loud as the vocals are during the verses. And the drumming is also louder and clearer. The fourth song is When I Get Home, and there are actually different vocal tracks, mono and stereo. And the way that you can tell the difference between the mono and the stereo mix of the song is in the line, I'll love her more when I walk till I walk out that door again, which he sings at the bridge. That's where you can tell they're two completely different vocal takes. The mono is a completely different vocal take than the stereo, and that's the place where you can spot it the most. The mono's a nice mix. I don't have any issues with the mono mix, but I think the stereo has a beefier sound. The double tracking's a bit more noticeable, but you can hear the piano on the bridge a little clearer in mono. But I'm still going to go with the stereo mix. It just had a beefier sound, and especially, with a kind of a, I don't want to call it aggressive song, but just with a real up-tempo track like that, I think it's served better in stereo. Slow down, the stereo is much better by far. Mono version is okay, but I just enjoyed the stereo version overall. The song Matchbox, there's lots of echo on the stereo vocal. In fact, I would say probably maybe a little too much echo. In mono, the vocal is much clearer and the guitar is also clear. So I would favor the mono version on that particular track. The rest of the tracks are essentially the same because the only remaining tracks are the ones that are already available on the United Artists A Hard Day's Night soundtrack, and those were covered in my review of the Hard Day's Night US album, so I'm not going to go over those. If you're interested in knowing the differences and what I prefer, you can check that video out. The last track that I'm going to cover in this video is going to be the German version of I Want to Hold Your Hand. In mono, everything's quieter. It's not a bad mix, but in stereo, it's much brighter. Everything's louder. There's nothing lost in the mono or the stereo. I think they're both good mixes, but just stereo seemed a little punchier and a little brighter, and I just found it was a livelier mix and enjoyed that one more. So overall, I think the stereo version is the version that I would prefer over the mono version of Something New. Again, nothing wrong with the mono mix, but I just find that stereo is a much more enjoyable listening experience and sounds better on a stereo for sure. Probably not so much if you're listening to it either on your phone or maybe in your car, but if you've got a stereo system and you want to crank it up, I think you'll definitely notice that the stereo version is a much more rewarding listening experience. So that is my review of Something New. I know I said in my last video I was going to do Beatles for Sale, and that one hopefully will be coming up soon, but I think right now we're caught up to the British and American albums, and we're at the end of, nearing the end of 1964, so Beatles for Sale, it will be next. I appreciate everybody watching and also your comments and your likes. Take care.